In this module, we will commence by learning Lucas supply curve. The development of macroeconomic theory in 1970s was significantly influenced by the Lucas critique. This critique implies that we cannot use macroeconomic models for econometric modeling because their inbuilt assumptions do not serve to check the effects of alternative policies. This is due to the fact that every macroeconomic model is endowed with macro foundation. It means justifying assumed behavioral relations between macroeconomic variables in terms of microeconomic behavior. Lucas developed his imperfect information model as an alternative theory of the Phillips curve and the money-driven business cycle under the assumption of rational expectations. He showed that a positive relationship between output and inflation could arise because of imperfect information regarding the aggregate price level. Lucas supply curve has played a significant role in the formulation of macroeconomic models under rational expectations. The policy ineffectiveness proposition that any systematic monetary policy will have no impact on the time path of aggregate output is based not only upon the assumptions of rational expectations and market clearing prices, but also upon the assumption that we incorporate Lucas supply curve. Let us now discuss in detail the robustness of theoretical propositions associated with rational expectations and issues relating to neutrality of money, the informational structure of the economy and the existence of nominal contracts. After studying this module, you shall be able to know the Phillips curve relation, understand the implications of rational expectations, identify the sources of business cycle and employment fluctuations, evaluate the Lucas supply curve, analyze the implications of rational expectations and Lucas supply curve in the policy ineffectiveness proposition. Let us begin by understanding the link between inflation and unemployment. According to Phillips curve, there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. Higher inflation would be accompanied by low unemployment rate. When unemployment rate is low, it becomes difficult for firms to find workers. Whatever supply of labor is available, it comes at high wage, which in turn reflected in high prices. In such a tight labor market, a union strike would be devastating because firms would be unable to recruit additional labor and lose sales. Under such circumstances, firm would expect higher wage inflation and correspondingly prices will also rise. According to Phelps and Friedman, in the long run, there is no trade-off between inflation and unemployment as unemployment is at its natural rate. So they asserted that a permanent trade-off between inflation and unemployment is illusion. According to Friedman, there is a short-run trade-off between the two as expectation of inflation is slow to adjust. But he argues that people cannot be fooled forever, so long-run trade-off does not exist. If the monetary authority wants to keep the unemployment rate below the natural rate, then it should be ready to accept continuously rising inflation which would be beyond individuals' expected inflation. So, unemployment rate can be brought down at the cost of higher permanent inflation. Adaptive expectations adapt gradually to the changes in economic variables. So, under adaptive expectations, policymakers will make some temporary gain in employment at the cost of higher inflation rate. But when people have rational expectations, they make use of all the given information and then make a forecast about inflation rate. The available information includes any proposed monetary or fiscal policy changes So, expectation error does not have any systematic pattern and forecasting error turns out to be a random term. Movement of unemployment rate from natural rate will occur only when error is made, but this error is random. This has crucial implications for monetary policy. It implies that unanticipated change in money supply can make actual inflation rate different from expected inflation rate. This is because any unanticipated change in money supply will be taken into account by the people forming expectations. So, systematic and unanticipated monetary policy has no effect on output and unemployment. It is only unanticipated part which causes expectation error leading to change in output. Next, we will discuss sources of business cycle fluctuation. Business cycle and fluctuations in employment have been analyzed by Lucas, assuming that the competitive agents are individual representative producers producing single good and who make decisions on the basis of less than perfect information. The selling price of this agent is identified with the real wage, that is, on the basis of selling price, the individual will decide how much labor to supply. Whenever there is an increase in selling price, the corresponding decision to supply more or less labor depends on whether an increase in selling price is temporary or permanent. Then labor supply will not change much. This is because for the primary worker, elasticity of labor with respect to real wage is very low. If the increase in selling price is temporary, then he makes the substitution between labor and leisure. This happens because leisure has become an expensive commodity now. So, small fluctuations in real wage will cause large fluctuations in employment. On the other hand, for permanent change in selling price, the employment will not change much. According to Lucas, the workers are always on the labor supply curve where labor market always clears. He does not believe in involuntary unemployment. There are fiscal policy effects also on the labor supply, like changes in the tax rate which affect the after-tax income of the individual. But here also permanent change in tax rate will have small effect on labor supply. To decide whether change in price is temporary or permanent, the individual has to make expectation about it. This expectation would rely on past experience of the individuals. If in the past period most of the change in prices is permanent, then he would expect the price change to be permanent and labor supply will not change. If the price change is temporary in the past period, he would expect the current price change to be temporary. Also, the change in taste or invention of new products or technology might produce profit for some and losses for others. So, some individual will face an increase in price while others a decrease in price. Those who face increase in price will vary their labor supply depending upon how much the change is temporary. Another source of business cycle is uncertainty in the nominal prices. The individuals are interested in purchasing power of one unit of labor and not just the nominal payment. If aggregate price is uncertain, then individual has to decide whether the change in price is change in real price or not. If all the prices increase, then there might not be change in relative supply price, but if other prices do not change, then there will be change in his relative price. So, the individual has to rely on past experience for the price change. Here we assume that individual does not have too much information, so he cannot distinguish between overall price change and change in relative price. Lucas argues that gathering information involves time and money, as it is difficult to get information in short notice and sometimes the producer has to respond quickly and it is not worth waiting to get all the information. Aggregate and relative price changes cause economy-wide business fluctuations. Fluctuations in business can occur if there is unexpected increase in money supply. This will lead to unexpected increase in the price level. The individual producer, based on past experience, will attribute a part of price change to aggregate price change and a part to the relative price change. Temporary employment will increase in countries that have volatile aggregate price level. Producer will view most price movements as aggregate price changes. So, monetary shocks will not cause large fluctuation in GDP and employment. Whereas in countries with stable price level, unanticipated changes in prices are changes in relative price and accordingly treated as temporary change will change the employment and GDP. So, in countries with volatile inflation history, workers cannot be fooled easily and employment will not fluctuate, whereas in stable inflation economies, policy makers can cause booms easily by changing the unanticipated inflation. But this policy cannot continue for so long as it would cause inflation rate to be volatile. The movement in general price level is caused by movement in money. But Lucas argues that long-term movement in money and price is strong. But in short period, the link is not so strong. If the link between money and price is close, then agents can easily calculate the general price level and there would not be unanticipated inflation and no business cycle. Another source of business cycle is change in interest rate. If interest of rate is high, agents will work more and put their extra proceeds in bank to enjoy higher consumption in future. Moving on to Lucas supply curve, the Lucas aggregate supply function, which is based on the Lucas imperfect information model, is a representation of aggregate supply based on the work of new classical economist Robert Lucas. The model states that economic output is a function of money or price surprise. The model accounts for the empirically based trade-off between output and prices represented by the Phillips curve, but the function breaks from the Phillips curve since only unanticipated price level changes lead to changes in output. The model considers the empirically observed short-run correlations between output and prices, but maintains the neutrality of money in the long run. The Lucas supply function with rational expectations under the policy ineffectiveness proposition implies that only unanticipated changes in the money supply can affect real output. Anticipated changes in the money supply affect only the price level, leaving the real output equal to potential output. This implies that since people with rational expectations cannot be systematically surprised by monetary policy cannot be used to systematically influence the economy. The rationale behind Lucas supply theory is based on how suppliers get information. Lucas claimed that suppliers had to respond to a signal extraction problem when making decisions based on prices. The firms had to decide what portion of price changes in their respective industries reflected inflation, that is nominal change in prices, and what portion reflected a change in real prices for inputs and outputs. Lucas hypothesized that suppliers know their own industries better than the general economy. Given this imbalance in information, a supplier could distinguish a general increase in prices due to inflation as an increase the relative price for its output, reflecting a better real price for its output and encouraging more production. The surprise leads to an increase in production and employment throughout the economy. The simple aggregate supply function can be represented simply as Y is a function of in bracket P minus PE. This means that output is a function of gap in actual and expected price level. The Lucas supply curve adds expectation to this model. Aggregate supply is the function of the potential output and the difference between actual prices PT and the expected price level based on prices in previous period times a coefficient based on an economy sensitivity to price changes beta. Yt is equal to Yp plus beta in bracket Pt minus T minus 1 P expected T. This Lucas supply curve model output as a function of the price or money surprise. The difference between expected and actual inflation, Lucas surprise business cycle theory fell out of favor after the 1970s when empirical evidence failed to support this model.
Now we will understand the policy ineffectiveness proposition with Lucas supply curve. Policy ineffectiveness proposition is related to the ineffectiveness of monetary policy. Policy ineffectiveness means any predictable change in money has no effect on GDP, employment, or any other real variable. It is only the unpredictable part of money supply that affects GDP and employment. Changes in money supply, whether predictable or unpredictable, will affect the price level and inflation rate, but output can be affected by only unpredictable or unanticipated movement in money supply. Sargent and Wallace have worked on the policy ineffectiveness proposition using the following relations. First, aggregate demand relation based on quantity theory of money. According to quantity theory, MV is equal to PY. Taking logs, we get MT plus VT is equal to PT plus YT, where MT is equal to log of money supply. Vt is equal to log of constant velocity of money. Pt is equal to log of price level. Yt is equal to log of real output. According to equation, the demand for money is not function of rate of interest. That is, it does not respond to changes in R. Lucas supply curve. Yt is equal to Yp plus beta bracket Pt minus T minus 1 P expected T, where Yt is equal to actual output. Yp is equal to potential or full employment output. Pt is equal to actual level of prices. T minus 1 P expected T is equal to log of price that people expect will occur in period T based on prices in period T minus 1. According to this aggregate supply curve, the difference between actual and full employment output depends on the difference between the actual and the expected price. If Pt is greater than T minus 1 P expected T, then Yt is greater than Yp. And if Pt is less than T minus 1 P expected T, then Yt is less than Yp. In panel A of figure, aggregate demand curve is drawn for a given money supply. It is downward sloping because higher prices will lead to lower output to keep the nominal demand constant. Aggregate supply curve is drawn for a given expected price level. It is upward sloping, implying that at higher price level, the gap between actual and expected prices rise and thus leads to more output being produced. At the intersection of these two curves, equilibrium price and output level is determined. If the price expectations are fixed, then a monetary expansion by the monetary authorities will shift the AD curve rightwards, leading to a rise in prices as well as output. Thus, only AD shifts while the AS remains at its original level as shown in panel B. This result is incompatible if we incorporate the rational expectations in our model. For this, we introduce the money supply rule. Third, money supply rule. MT is equal to alpha y t minus 1 plus epsilon, where alpha y t minus 1 is equal to last period's output. Epsilon is equal to unpredictable shock in bracket random error term. According to this equation, money supply is a function of last year's level of output plus a random error term. This error term has zero expected value and it cannot be predicted either by monetary authorities or public. Y t minus 1 is the feedback policy of the authorities as it depends on the past value of the observed variable. According to policy ineffectiveness proposition, the parameter alpha, which is set by the authorities, has no impact on output or employment. It is only the unpredictable part epsilon which would affect the output and employment in the economy. In our previous analysis of monetary expansion, an unanticipated shift in money supply shifts AD to the right, but due to rational expectations, people's expectations about prices also revise upward. As a result, AS curve also shifts upwards so that the level of output remains at full employment and monetary expansion causes only price change as shown in figure. But this result is compatible only if there is no random shock in the economy. Under rational expectations, t minus 1 p expected t is equal to E in bracket pt by I t minus 1, where E in bracket pt by I t minus 1 is equal to 0. Thus, using the following relations, we derive the implications of policy ineffectiveness proposition. Aggregate demand MT plus VT is equal to PT plus YT. Lucas supply curve YT is equal to YP plus beta in bracket PT minus T minus 1 P expected T bracket close. Money supply curve MT is equal to alpha y T minus 1 plus epsilon. Rational expectations T minus 1 P expected T is equal to E in bracket PT by I T minus 1 bracket close. Substituting Lucas supply curve equation in AD curve. MT plus VT minus PT is equal to YP plus beta in bracket PT minus T minus 1 P expected T. Taking mathematical expectation on both sides, alpha y t minus 1 plus Vt minus t minus 1 P expected T is equal to Yp. T minus 1 P expected T is equal to alpha y t minus 1 plus Vt minus Yp. The expected money is calculated by using the money supply rule that first, E in bracket epsilon t is equal to 0. Second, E in bracket pt I t minus 1 is equal to t minus 1 p expected t. Third, E in bracket p t minus 1 minus t minus 1 p expected t is equal to 0. That is, forecasting error is 0. Substituting the money supply rule and equation in, MT plus VT minus PT is equal to YP plus beta in bracket PT minus T minus 1 P expected T bracket close. We get alpha y T minus 1 plus epsilon T plus Vt minus Pt is equal to Yp plus beta in bracket Pt minus alpha y t minus 1 minus Vt plus Yp bracket close. Solving the above, we get Pt is equal to alpha y t minus 1 plus Yt minus Yp plus epsilon t upon 1 plus beta. Alpha y t minus 1 plus Vt minus Yt is equal to t minus 1 p expected t. Pt is equal to t minus 1 p expected t plus epsilon t upon 1 plus beta. Pt minus t minus 1 p expected t is equal to epsilon t upon 1 plus beta. Using Lucas supply curve, Yt is equal to Yp plus beta upon 1 plus beta into epsilon t. This equation reflects the policy ineffectiveness proposition that only the unanticipated part of money supply, that is, epsilon t, can affect output. The predictable part of money supply will only affect prices and not output. This implies neutrality of money, which says that anticipated change in money stock affect only nominal variables and not the real variables. Also, according to Lucas supply curve, output deviates from the full employment level only when prices deviate from expected prices.
Now let us summarize what we have learned in this module. First, the trade between inflation and unemployment disappears in the long run when people are assumed to have rational expectations. Second, there are many sources of business cycle that have been listed by Lucas, including imperfect information, uncertainty in nominal prices, changes in technology, changes in rate of interest, etc. Third, the Lucas aggregate supply function is based on the Lucas imperfect information model, which states that economic output is a function of money or price surprise. Fourth, policy ineffectiveness proposition is related to the ineffectiveness of monetary policy. The inclusion of Lucas supply curve and rational expectations leads to no change in real variables when the money supply is raised. Fifth, PIP with Lucas supply curve implies that money is neutral, which implies that unanticipated change in money stock affect only nominal variables and not the real variables.